This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, ho there. It's Jeff Carter Diamond. Welcome to another Sports Catastrophe on the State. And on this day, November 17th, 1991, tragedy struck the Detroit Lions. As you can see in the picture, there's a old Detroit Lion in a wheelchair with number 60. That is Mike Utley. Now, unfortunately for Mike Utley, he was an offensive guard who ended up being injured in a critical game for the Detroit Lions. They were playing at the Silverdome against the Rams and all that. So let's talk about the 1991 Detroit Lions, if you must know. They were off some very good. They had a good draft. With the 10th pick, they took Herman Moore, a wide receiver from Virginia. You'd be thinking, well, that's nothing new. But Herman Moore was a beast with the Cavaliers and a beast with the Detroit Lions. In fact, he was one of the best wide receivers not named Calvin Johnson in Lions history. So the Lions had a good roster, but they had three quarterbacks on their roster: Eric Kramer, Chuck Long, and Andre Ware. All not really very good NFL stars. Kramer had some good years for the Bears. Chuck Long, forget it. He was only good with Iowa in the college football. Same as Andre Ware. He was good with the Houston Cougars and nothing else. Running backs, they had Barry Sanders, the legend Barry Sanders. Their backup running back was a great kick returner by the name of Mel Gray. And DJ Dozier, the bulldozer, as I call him, was also at running back. At wide receiver, you had Herman Moore make the squad with Brett Perryman and Willie Green. Tight ends, not really that good either. Offensive linemen, they had Bubba Paris of the San Francisco dynasty days. Lomas Brown was also good. Eric Anozak was good. You had Kelvin Pritchett on defense. Tracy Hayward, Victor Jones, Chris Spielman, Betty Blades, Ray Crockett, Sheldon White, William White, and Eddie Murray, the guy from, not the baseball star, the guy from Canada who was the kicker. So their first game, they went to Washington and got their butts handed to them 45-0. Little did anyone know that the Lions, this wasn't the only time the Lions would face Washington, despite the fact they were not in the same division. Week 2, they beat Green Bay 23-14. Week 3, they beat the Dolphins 17-13. They went into Indianapolis and beat the Colts 33-24. They hosted Tampa and crushed them in Week 5. Week 6, they beat the Vikings thanks to a late rally. They went to San Francisco, got their asses handed to them. They crushed the Cowboys 34-10. Little did anyone know that this wouldn't be the only time the Cowboys and Lions would meet in the season, even though that they're not in the same division. They went to Soldier Field and lost 20-10, and then they lost in Tampa Bay. How can you lose to Tampa? Ugh. So week 12, they were playing the Rams. Ferd Lundquist and Dan Phelps were doing the game. It was a 4 o'clock game for some strange reason. Unfortunately, though, Mike Utley would suffer something huge. Utley had played for Detroit. He was a guard for the number 60. Unfortunately, for some strange reason, he had a paralysis. In the fourth quarter against the Rams, in which the Lions scored 2 touchdowns to beat the Rams, Utley somehow got an injury to his 6th and 7th cervical vertebrae. He would be told that he would be paralyzed from the chest down. So anyway, despite all that, Utley had enough strength to flash a thumbs up to the Lion fans, saying that everything is going to be okay. So the Lions used this thing. And after Utley's thumbs up, the Lions went to Minnesota, crushed the Vikings, beat the Bears on home turf, beat the Jets on home turf, and then went to Green Bay and beat them. 21-17. In fact, the great job by Eric Kramer was such that the Lions, this would be the last time the Lions won in Green Bay until 2015. So they had a 24-year drought. And then they went into Buffalo and surprised them by a field goal in overtime. That win was huge for Detroit because not only did they win 12 games, that win actually was huge because the Bears lost their final game. So that meant the Lions won the NFC Central at 12-4. And what's even more freaky is that the Lions went on a winning streak of 6 games. So starting from the game that Utley was paralyzed against the Rams, and then the 5 games after that, the Lions went 6-0. They were 6-4 before Utley's injury, and then won 6 straight. Spurred on by Utley's thumbs up, it made a rallying cry, and the Lions used it to their advantage, winning 6 games and taking down the Bears for the division. It's just amazing how, superficial things could get. So the Lions were the 2 seed, which meant that they didn't have to go to the wildcard playoff like the 3rd place team had to. They would take on Dallas. Now, the NFC was huge. Well, Washington had that 11-0 start in 1991, which parlayed them to 14 wins. So Detroit was the 2 seed, meaning they would be okay and had to wait for their opponent. But the shocking thing is that both the Bears and Saints, who were the home teams for the wildcard weekend, well, the Saints were the division champions, not the Niners, which was shocking. Enough as this. But of course, this was the season that Montana had to miss the full year. The Bears were at home. They lost to Dallas, and Atlanta beat New Orleans. So that meant Atlanta would be going to Washington in the playoffs, and Dallas would be headed to Detroit. So Detroit would host Dallas. Now, this isn't the same Dallas Cowboys team that won back-to-back Super Bowls. This was a team that was a couple years removed from an embarrassing 1-15 season. So the Cowboys came into town, and somehow, in some way, the Lions crushed the Cowboys 38-6. It wasn't even close. Steve Beuerlein actually was the starter for the Cowboys, not Troy Aikman. But Aikman did get injured, and Beuerlein helped the team make the playoffs and started in the win over Chicago. So Kramer would be the starter as Ronnie Pete went down with injury. The Lions had a lot to feel good about and all that because it was Barry friggin' Sanders. Barry Sanders would be huge, doing quite well. Now, not to say that Barry Sanders was the main reason why the Lions won. It was Eric Kramer putting up a 29-for-38 performance, 341 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the Cowboys could only pick up a few field goals by Ken Willis. Who the hell is him? What you talking about, Willis? So the Lions scored 24 unanswered points, won 38-6, and would move on to the conference finals. And it was like shocking. Yep, these weren't the same Dallas Cowboys that won back-to-back Super Bowls. Now, the only problem was this was the only time the Lions won in the playoffs in the Super Bowl era. So, for all the crap that Jacksonville, Cleveland, and the Houston Texans are, at least they've won playoff games in the more games in the Super Bowl era than the Lions. Well, of course, that sets up the fact that the Lions went into Washington and got their asses handed to them again. They were there in week 1, but then this was the NFC title game, and they got their butts handed to them 41-10. Despite all that, the Lions felt proud of themselves. I mean, getting to the conference finals. But the worst part about everything was that the Lions slipped up and all that. But the good news for the Lions is that the Lions were 9-0 on home turf. They won all 8 of their regular season home games, and that game against Dallas in the divisional round. So for how crappy Detroit seems to be, 91 was an inspiring season, and Mike Utley's thumbs up gave Detroit the cause that they could go on to the Super Bowl. They didn't, but they got to the Super Bowl in a metaphorical way. Isn't that what we all wanted? Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.